The wind moved like a whisper through the pines of Elk Hollow, brushing needles together in a hush that felt almost sacred. Morning sunlight trickled through the forest canopy, golden and soft, but the air remained heavy with winter's parting breath. In the distance, a blue jay called once, sharp, uncertain, then fell silent. At the base of a frost-kissed ridge, a group of campers stirred restlessly. Shouting had started less than 15 minutes ago. Sharp with panic, a boy named Eli was gone. 7 years old, last seen near the river bend with a backpack full of granola bars and a half-read dinosaur book. No one had seen him since. Panic is a quiet thing at first. It doesn't scream, it creeps. Parents whisper low, then shout. Radios crackle. Footsteps grow frantic. But not Hunter. He didn't panic. Hunter sat at the edge of the treeline, his thick sable coat catching bits of frost. A German shepherd with an aging gait and steady gaze. He no longer wore the official K9 vest he once had. Semi-retired, as they called it. A companion, now. But the fire in him, that sense that something needed him, never left. When he barked, it wasn't loud. It was short, sharp, specific. And Daniel Monroe heard it. Daniel had just arrived at the campground that morning, assisting his sister, Elise, who was part of the park's spring ecology project. But he knew the sound of Hunter's bark. He'd heard it in a blizzard in Wyoming, in the wreckage of a flood zone in Montana. It meant something was out of place. It meant someone needed help. He looked toward the shepherd. Hunter? Another bark, this time, followed by a low, urgent growl. Daniel dropped the pack he was carrying and jogged toward the treeline. A woman stepped into his path, Elise, worry etched in the lines of her face. Eli's missing, she said quickly. He wandered off. No one's seen him in over an hour. We already searched the trailheads. He's not. Hunter's got a scent. Daniel interrupted gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. Let's trust him. Elise didn't hesitate. She simply nodded and followed as Daniel unclipped the leash from Hunter's harness. The dog bolted forward, nose close to the ground, weaving between roots and low brush. Within minutes, they were deep in the woods. The trail was no longer visible. The wind had changed, and so had the quiet. The forest, once full of bird song and breeze, now felt alert, listening. Hunter paused suddenly at the base of a twisted pine. His ears perked. Then he turned to the left and began moving with purpose toward the ravine, a known boundary of the camping area. Steep and dangerous. Is he really going that way? Elise asked, panting slightly. He's never wrong, Daniel said, though he tried to keep his voice even. And if Eli went toward the cliffs? He didn't finish the sentence. Just then, a new sound echoed faintly across the hollow, a voice. High and fragile. It wasn't a scream, but something even more chilling. Help. Elise's breath hitched. Daniel broke into a run. Hunter didn't wait for them. He surged ahead, disappearing down a narrow slope carpeted in moss and loose stones. By the time Daniel reached the edge, he saw him, standing perfectly still, tail down, head high, staring into the gully. And there, clinging to a fallen log halfway down the cliff, was Eli. His tiny fingers were locked onto the bark. His shoes had slipped. His backpack dangled from one shoulder. He wasn't crying anymore, he was too exhausted. Daniel dropped to his knees and grabbed the radio clipped to his belt. This is Monroe. Found the boy. Coordinates transmitting. We need rope rescue, fast. The reply crackled faintly. ETA 15 minutes. Too long. He looked at Hunter. The dog didn't wait. With a slow, practiced step, Hunter began to descend the incline. Paws finding grip between the roots and shale. One slip and it would be over, but he didn't slip. He moved like he remembered. Daniel held his breath. Hunter reached the fallen log. Carefully, deliberately, he lay down across it, positioning his body in such a way that Eli could press his chest against the warmth of fur and not fall. Eli whimpered something unintelligible. Hunter simply let out a low, calming huff. Above them, Daniel watched with eyes wide, not in surprise, but in awe. It wasn't a rescue yet. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. That boy had just been pulled back from the edge. And it was only chapter 1. The ridge loomed like a warning, steep, cold, and silent. Below it, time had stopped. Daniel didn't breathe, not properly. His lungs moved in short, measured puffs. trying not to disturb the tension hanging between the trees like a held note in a song that hadn't resolved. Hunter remained sprawled across the fallen log, his body forming a bridge of sorts. A barrier. A comfort. Eli's arms were wrapped tight around the dog's back, his small frame shaking with adrenaline and cold. The boy didn't say anything now, just clung to the fur beneath his fingers as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. Above them, Daniel paced the edge carefully, assessing. The incline was too unstable for a direct climb, loose gravel, shallow roots, and wet pine needles layered like glass on stone. One wrong step and both the boy and the dog would be gone. He keyed his radio again. Monroe again. I have visual on the subject. Boy is stable for now. Dog's in position holding him. We need the rope team here yesterday. Static buzzed. Then a clipped voice. 5 minutes out. Hold position. Daniel's jaw clenched. 5 minutes might as well have been forever. He looked back down at Hunter. The shepherd's ears twitched, his head turning just slightly toward Daniel as if to say, I've got him. But hurry. Daniel dropped to one knee, eyes scanning the tree line for anything, roots, vines, a stick, anything that could help. Then, a noise behind him, fast steps, muffled. A figure broke through the underbrush, tall, bundled in a tan parka, wind-blown hair under a wool hat. Daniel? It was Sadie Holt, a volunteer with wildlife rehab. She had worked with Daniel's sister the summer before, tracking injured foxes across the ridgeline. She was quick-witted, resourceful, and carrying a coil of climbing rope. I heard the call on the emergency band, she said, breathless. Brought rope, harness. I'm trained. Daniel didn't waste time. You anchor. I go down. Sadie tossed him the harness. You sure? He nodded. He's my dog, and that boy's running out of time. Moments later, Daniel clipped the rope to a thick pine root and looped the harness tight around his waist. The first snowflakes of the afternoon began to fall, gentle, aimless, but enough to promise that the terrain would worsen. You've got this, Sadie said quietly, gripping the rope. I better. He leaned over the ledge and began his descent, slow and calculated, each step chosen like it was sacred. Down below, Hunter never looked away. Eli's fingers had grown stiff. His breathing was faster now. Panicked again, the cold seeped through his coat, and a tremor passed through his limbs like an echo of fear. Hunter moved, not abruptly, just a gentle shift, enough to rest his head on Eli's lap. He exhaled, warm air puffing against the boy's arm. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Eli whispered, I don't want to fall. Hunter blinked, slow, reassuring, his tail tapped once against the bark. Then, Daniel's voice, echoing from above, Eli, I'm coming, buddy, I see you. The boy's eyes filled with tears. That's my uncle. Hunter gave a soft, muffled bark. Daniel's boots reached the ledge moments later. One gloved hand gripped the edge of the log, the other reaching for Eli. You're okay. You're safe. I've got you. But Eli didn't move. He was frozen, not by fear, but something deeper. That limbo between holding on and letting go. The space between heartbeats when the body forgets what safety feels like. So Hunter moved again. He stood slowly, easing out from under the boy's arms, and placed himself behind him. A gentle nudge from his snout. A push, not forceful, but intentional. Eli shifted forward just enough for Daniel to reach him. One breath, two. Then Daniel's hand closed around his arm. Gotcha. He pulled the boy upward, cradling him with one arm, guiding his feet with the other. Sadie steadied the rope from above as they ascended, inch by inch, until finally, the boy reached solid ground. Minutes later, EMTs arrived, blankets, vitals, questions. But Eli only looked for Hunter. The shepherd was still down below, pacing at the base of the cliff. Daniel signaled to the nearest rescue tech. He comes with us. They nodded, sending a secondary line. Daniel rappelled down again, not because he had to, but because he wanted to be the one to bring Hunter back. When he reached the dog, he crouched and ran a hand through the thick fur. You're not done, old man, he whispered, but you're coming home. Hunter nuzzled his hand. They rose together, and as the first real flurry of snow came down hard across Elk Hollow, a boy wrapped in a silver blanket whispered to no one in particular, he didn't let me fall. The storm didn't wait for permission. It rolled in fast. A blanket of silver mist descending on the valley like breath held too long. Wind whispered through the pines, rattling their branches and sending needles dancing like ash from some unseen fire. The rescue team had packed up, but the stillness afterward was louder than the chaos. Daniel stood at the ranger station window, watching the snowfall. His coffee had gone cold in his hands. Outside, the boy slept curled beneath a wool blanket, a camp cot drawn close to the heater. Across from him, curled like a question mark around the base of the cot, was Hunter. The dog hadn't moved since Eli was brought inside. He lay still, ears occasionally twitching, his chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm with the boy's. Daniel turned toward the soft knock on the door. Sadie stepped inside, brushing snow from her sleeves. I checked the trail again. There's no sign of anyone else. No footprints leading to that log. Daniel's brow furrowed. So he didn't wander. He was left. Sadie hesitated. That's what it looks like. Daniel looked back at the boy. He didn't stir. What kind of person leaves a kid in the woods, in a storm? Sadie's voice was quiet. Someone desperate. Or cruel. Maybe both. Daniel didn't answer. His jaw tightened. Outside, the wind picked up. Hours passed. The storm grew teeth. In the small kitchen off the ranger station's main room, Sadie brewed soup and checked the radio for updates. Daniel sat beside Eli, who had woken briefly, asked for water, then slipped back into an uneasy sleep. Hunter still hadn't moved. You can rest, Daniel murmured to the dog. Hunter opened one eye, then closed it again. At midnight, a soft whimper woke Daniel. Eli sat upright, breath shallow, eyes wide. Hunter immediately pressed against his side, calming him. Daniel knelt beside him. Hey, you're safe now. I'm Daniel. This is Hunter. Eli didn't speak, but he nodded, barely. Can you tell me your name? The boy looked at Hunter first, then back at Daniel. Eli, he whispered. Do you know where your parents are? A pause, then a shake of the head. Daniel looked away, biting down on the ache in his chest. Hunter gave a soft whine and nosed Eli's hand gently. Do you remember how you got to the woods? Eli's brow furrowed. His mouth moved without words. His small hands fisted in the blanket. Daniel didn't press. He just said, It's okay. We're not going anywhere. And for the first time that night, Eli leaned forward and hugged Hunter around the neck. By morning, the storm had passed. Pine needles glistened beneath the melting snow, and the sky opened up in cold, brilliant blue. News of the rescue had already begun to spread. Local radio ran a segment calling Hunter the miracle dog of Elk Hollow. A reporter from the regional news called the station, requesting an interview. Daniel refused, but he agreed to one thing: a vet checkup for Hunter. At the Pine Ridge Field Clinic, Dr. Keller, a gruff, broad-shouldered man who had once treated elk with his bare hands, examined Hunter with the reverence usually reserved for war heroes. No sprains, he murmured. No frostbite. Heart's strong. That dog's solid. And loyal. Daniel gave a half smile. Always has been. Back at the station, Eli sat at the table with Sadie, drawing pictures with colored pencils she'd pulled from the supply closet. One was a mountain. One was a dog. The third, unfinished, looked like a house with smoke curling from the chimney. A home. Who's that? Sadie asked, gently pointing to the figure standing in the yard. Eli answered without looking up. That's me. And Hunter. Sadie smiled. That night, Daniel lay awake in the bunk above the ranger station office. The power had come back an hour ago, and soft lamplight spilled across the walls. Below, Eli slept in the cot again. Hunter lay on the floor. Daniel stared at the ceiling. Memories drifted in like fog. The avalanche, the search, the day Emma didn't come back. Hunter had been with him since then. Through silence, through sleepless nights, through it all, he closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for a boy who had already survived something terrible, and for the dog who refused to let him go. The morning came with the scent of thawing pine and something unspoken hanging in the air. Eli was outside now, bundled in an oversized coat, boots clunking awkwardly as he wandered the edge of the ranger station clearing. Hunter followed close behind, not hurting, not guarding, just being near. A shadow with warm breath and eyes full of quiet knowing. Daniel watched from the porch, coffee in hand. He didn't speak, he just watched, thinking about how stillness sometimes says more than words ever could. Sadie came out from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. He didn't say much during breakfast, she said, but he ate 2 whole pancakes. Daniel nodded. That's something. Sadie leaned against the porch railing. I reached out to missing persons again. Still nothing matching Eli's description in the last 3 weeks. Daniel frowned. That's not possible. It is if no one's looking, she said, softly. They both watched Eli crouch near a half-melted snowbank, running a stick through the slush. Hunter sat beside him, tail sweeping slowly. He doesn't flinch around Hunter. Sadie murmured. Doesn't startle. Doesn't freeze. You know what that tells me? Daniel raised an eyebrow. That boy's seen more kindness from that dog than from most people in his life. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Later that day, a social services liaison named Claire arrived. She was young, probably mid-20s, with wide, careful eyes and a notepad she clutched like a shield. She wore a blazer too light for the weather and boots too clean for the trail. Claire knelt in front of Eli inside the station. Hi, Eli. My name's Claire. I just want to talk to you. Okay? Just talk. Eli looked at her, then at Hunter. Hunter, lying beside the couch, thumped his tail once against the floor. Claire tried again. Do you remember where you live? Eli stared at her. Do you remember your mom or dad's name? Still silence. Claire looked to Daniel and Sadie. Sometimes it takes time. Trauma can make things cloudy. Daniel crossed his arms. He's not cloudy. He's cautious. Claire smiled nervously. Right, of course. She scribbled something on her notepad, then looked up. And the dog? He found him? No, Daniel said, voice low. He stayed with him. Claire blinked. Okay, well, until we figure out where he belongs. I'll need to start the intake process. He may have to come into temporary placement. Daniel's jaw tensed. That won't be necessary. Claire gave a tight, polite nod, but didn't argue. That evening, snow began to fall again. Not a storm, just quiet flakes settling like feathers. Inside, Eli sat cross-legged on the rug, brushing Hunter's coat with slow, careful strokes. The dog didn't move. Daniel sat nearby, flipping through old maps on the coffee table. Not really reading. After a long silence, Eli said, Hunter knew. Daniel looked up. Knew what? That I was scared. Daniel set the map down. I didn't tell him, but he stayed. Daniel's voice was gentle. That's what he does. Eli didn't say anything more. But when he leaned into Hunter's side, the dog shifted, just slightly, to support him. Daniel watched the boy's small hand press into the warmth of the dog's fur. And something in him broke open. Not from pain, from recognition. They were both survivors, the boy and the dog. And maybe, just maybe, they were saving each other. The snowfall overnight was gentle, but steady, coating everything in Pine Hollow with a softness that dulled edges and quieted the woods. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows like a pale watercolor, catching on dust motes and the lazy curl of steam rising from mugs on the kitchen table. Eli was up early, already dressed in mismatched layers and sitting near the back door, boots dangling above the floor. Hunter sat beside him, alert but at ease, as if the two had reached some wordless agreement about the pace of the world. Daniel leaned in the doorway, sipping coffee. You're ready early. Eli nodded, glancing toward the tree line. Is he allowed to come? Daniel smiled slightly. He's allowed. He goes where you go. That day's plan had been simple. Check the northern boundary of the trail system before the heavier snows arrived. What Daniel hadn't planned on was bringing a child and a dog who were becoming increasingly inseparable. But somehow, it didn't feel strange. It felt necessary. The trail crunched beneath their boots. Eli walked ahead, Hunter beside him, nose occasionally brushing the snow but never straying far. Daniel brought up the rear, watching carefully, not because he didn't trust the boy or the dog, but because some part of him didn't trust the silence. Not the kind that fills the woods. That silence was familiar, welcome even. It was the silence inside Eli that worried him. That kind of quiet always held stories. Stories that hadn't found safe space yet to be spoken. About a mile into the forest, they stopped at a clearing. Daniel pulled out a thermos, poured cocoa into a tin cup, and handed it to Eli. Thanks, the boy said softly, eyes still on the trees. Daniel sat beside him on a fallen log, feeling the cold through his coat. You know, Daniel said after a moment. Hunter used to be part of a search and rescue team. Avalanche unit. We worked together for years. Eli looked up. He saved people? Sometimes. Sometimes we got there too late. But he always tried. Eli watched Hunter quietly. That's why he stayed. When I was in the snow, I wasn't moving. I didn't know where I was. But he found me. Daniel nodded, his voice gentle. Do you remember anything before that? The boy was quiet for a long time. Then, almost inaudibly, I heard yelling. Tires on gravel. Someone saying my name. Who was it? Eli shook his head. I think they left. Daniel's chest tightened. You mean, they drove away? A small nod. They said it wasn't worth it. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It throbbed with heartbreak. Hunter moved then, placing his body fully against the boy's legs. Eli dropped the cup and buried his hands in the dog's fur. Not crying, but clinging. The way someone clings to the one solid thing left in a shifting world. Daniel placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. They were wrong. Eli looked up, confused. You are worth it. Every second. Eli didn't respond, but when they stood to leave, he took Daniel's hand and didn't let go until they reached the edge of the woods. That night, after dinner, Daniel sat on the porch. Hunter stretched at his feet. Eli had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked under his chin. Sadie stepped outside, arms crossed, her breath visible in the cold. You know, she said, I've seen a lot of kids pass through foster. But that boy? He's different. He's still waiting for the world to let him down again. Daniel didn't look up. Then we don't. Sadie studied him for a beat. Then smiled. You thinking what I think you're thinking? I'm thinking I don't want him to be a temporary name in some file. I'm thinking he needs to know he has a place. Sadie nodded. Then you know what comes next. Daniel looked down at Hunter. I think, he said slowly, we already started. And inside the cabin, the fire flickered, and so did something else. Hope. The wind came in early, curling through Pine Hollow with a restless energy, rattling branches and whispering along windowsills like a warning no one could fully understand. Clouds gathered, low and gray, and the mountains wore a heavy silence. By afternoon, the first flakes were falling, not soft or slow, but fast and wind-driven, like needles stitching white across the forest. It wasn't just weather, it was memory. Inside the ranger cabin, Daniel stood staring out the window, one hand gripping the back of the kitchen chair. Hunter sat beside him, his ears twitching at every gust. Behind them, Eli and Sadie played cards on the floor. The boys' laughter soft and rare. Daniel didn't hear the laughter. All he could hear was another wind. Another storm, one that had come without warning 6 years ago and left a crater in his world. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until Sadie touched his arm. It's just snow, Dan, she said gently. I know, but his voice was tight. It never feels like just snow anymore. Sadie studied him. Are you with us right now? Or back there again? Daniel looked at her, eyes shadowed. Both. The power went out just before sunset. Sadie lit candles, and Daniel stoked the fire higher, loading the stove with split wood. Eli didn't say anything, but he kept glancing at the windows. The boy hadn't spoken about that night in the snow again, but the storm brought it closer, like a smell or a song that dredged up something too deep for words. Hunter sensed it, too. He didn't rest. He paced, slowly, deliberately, from room to room, circling back to Eli each time. At one point, the boy slipped off the couch and lay beside the dog on the rug. His fingers curled in Hunter's fur. The storm howled outside. Inside, they were wrapped in flickering shadows and a silence that held everything. Later that night, as the wind screamed through the trees and snow whipped against the roof like fists, Daniel stood on the porch in his coat, staring into the storm. He remembered the avalanche, the screams, the silence afterward, and then, Hunter, half buried, half frozen, but alive, and Emma, not. The guilt had never left. The belief that maybe, just maybe, if he had made one different decision, taken a different trail, called out sooner, she'd still be here. Still blaming yourself? Sadie's voice came softly from behind. Daniel didn't answer. She made her choices. So did you. You loved her. That's what matters. She believed in second chances. Daniel whispered. And I stopped believing for a long time. Sadie stepped beside him. But you didn't give up on Hunter. Or this place. Or Eli. That counts for something. Daniel looked down at the snow. Maybe this storm is a reminder, he said, of what we lost, but also what we found. Sadie smiled, then let it howl. Around midnight, Eli woke with a start. No nightmare, no scream, just wide eyes and a whisper. Hunter? The dog was already there, standing near the door, his ears perked, his head turned. Daniel came from the back hallway, flashlight in hand. What is it? Hunter growled low, not threatening, but alert, then barked once and scratched at the door. Daniel frowned, pulling on his boots. He opened the door a crack and squinted through the wind. A figure was moving, slow, struggling, along the edge of the tree line. Someone's out there, Daniel said sharply. He grabbed his coat, and Hunter darted out ahead of him into the white. Eli stood at the door, his heart in his throat. It was happening again. They found the girl maybe 20 yards from the porch, collapsed in the snow, teenaged, barely conscious, her cheeks raw and red from windburn. Daniel lifted her carefully while Hunter circled them, tail stiff, ears flat. Back inside, Sadie wrapped the girl in blankets while Daniel checked for frostbite and breathing. Eli stood in the hallway, arms folded tightly around himself. Who is she? He asked. No idea, Daniel said, but she's lucky we saw her when we did. Hunter sat beside the couch, watchful. Eli moved to stand beside him. She found us, Eli whispered. Daniel turned. No, he found her. He looked at Hunter, then at Eli. Just like he found you. Eli reached down and stroked the dog's neck. Outside, the storm still screamed, but inside, they were safe. And together. The girl's name was Mia. She was 17, from a nearby reservation, and had run from something she couldn't quite name. She didn't speak much the first day, just nodded when asked if she was warm enough. Shook her head when offered food until Hunter rested his head in her lap. And then she cried without a sound. Daniel called the local tribal liaison, who recognized her name immediately. Mia's been reported missing for 3 days. The woman on the other end said. Her grandmother's been praying every hour. Daniel promised they'd keep her safe. Sadie took over, wrapping Mia in care as quiet as snow. She fed her broth, brought her dry clothes, and braided her damp hair with the same tenderness she used on Eli. The boy hovered near, not speaking, just watching, perhaps sensing in Mia the same kind of hurt that once lived in him. Hunter never left her side. That evening, the storm had passed, leaving behind a thick coat of snow and a silence that felt like reverence. The power returned in flickers, but no one minded the dark. Daniel lit a fire, and they all gathered around it, 4 humans, 1 dog, and something unspoken between them all. Mia finally spoke. I wasn't trying to die, she said softly. I just needed to get away. Daniel nodded. Sometimes the only way to find yourself is to leave everything behind. She glanced at Hunter. He found me. Yeah, Eli said quietly. He does that. Hunter's tail brushed the floor once. A slow wag like acknowledgement. As the fire crackled, Mia shared more. Her mother gone. Her father sometimes cruel, sometimes nothing. A grandmother who tried to raise her in the old ways. Teach her about stars, wind, animals, but Mia had pulled away. Too much pain, she said, even in stories. Sadie stirred the fire gently. But pain is part of the story. It teaches us what love costs. Daniel spoke without looking up. And what it's worth. For a while, no one said anything. Eli leaned into Hunter, who rested against him like a sentry made of warmth and breath. Mia closed her eyes. Her face relaxed for the first time since she'd arrived. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of healing, of memory, of something sacred. Outside, the wind was gone, but the trees groaned softly under the weight of snow. Daniel stepped out onto the porch for air, his breath puffing in clouds. Behind him, the cabin glowed golden with firelight. He could hear Sadie humming softly, a tune his wife used to sing. He closed his eyes. You're still here, aren't you? He whispered to the dark. He didn't expect an answer, but he heard it anyway, in the rustle of branches, in the quiet shuffle of Hunter's paws behind him, in the warmth inside that house. Emma's presence wasn't a ghost. It was legacy. It was every soul who found shelter here. Back inside, Sadie laid out extra blankets. Eli helped, carefully folding them the way Daniel had shown him. Mia sat with a mug of tea, eyes unfocused but no longer hollow. And Hunter? Hunter walked from one to the other, checking. Reassuring. Steady. He's more than just a dog, Mia said. Daniel nodded. He's a reminder. Of what? That we're never as alone as we think. The fire snapped. Outside, the stars returned. And inside the cabin, 5 souls shared a moment of stillness so deep. It felt like grace. Morning came softly. The snow had stopped during the night, leaving the trees frosted in delicate white. A slow golden light seeped through the window panes of the cabin as the first rays of sun stretched across the Pine Ridge Valley. It was quiet, not from emptiness, but from peace, like the forest itself was holding its breath in calm. Hunter was the first to stir, padding silently to the door. Daniel was already up, coffee in hand, standing outside in his parka with a gaze that had seen both storms and sunrises. Hunter nudged his leg gently. No urgency. Just presence. Daniel looked down at him. We've come a long way, haven't we, boy? Hunter tilted his head, his eyes soft and understanding. It was hard not to believe the dog could read every word that wasn't spoken. Inside, Mia had slept through the night. Eli, curled on the couch, woke with a yawn and rubbed his eyes. Sadie brewed tea and warmed leftover stew by the fire. They moved quietly, respectfully, like pilgrims at a shrine. There was no need for loud voices or distraction. Not this morning. Mia joined them at the table, her face clearer now, like a mist had lifted from behind her eyes. I called my grandmother, she said. She cried so hard she couldn't speak. Daniel smiled. That's love, raw and loud. I want to go back, she added. Not forever, but to say I'm okay. To thank her. Sadie reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She'll be proud of you. Eli nodded solemnly. You're brave. Hunter gave a quiet woof, as if to second the motion. Later that day, the sheriff's vehicle arrived, carrying a woman in her 60s, wrapped in a turquoise shawl, her gray hair braided down her back. Mia ran to her, and they embraced in silence. The woman wept, but did not tremble. She held Mia's face in her hands and kissed her forehead. Thank you, she told Daniel, and then bent to look at Hunter. And you too, guardian. Hunter stood regal and still, receiving the blessing as if he understood it. Weeks passed. Spring began to show in small ways, melting snow, early shoots of green, the laughter of children hiking through the trees on field trips coordinated by Sadie and the new wilderness outreach team. Daniel and Sadie began plans to convert the old ranger station into a permanent shelter for at-risk youth and displaced animals. Mia returned to visit, helping with carpentry, brushing horses, and sitting with newcomers like she belonged. Eli grew stronger every day. His nightmares came less often. He started speaking more, drawing pictures of trees and wolves and a dog that looked exactly like Hunter. And Hunter? He was always there. When a storm came in fast, he alerted the cabin. When a fox got tangled in wire fencing, he found it. When a child cried alone by the fire pit, Hunter lay beside them until they stopped. He didn't need words to teach. He taught by standing still. One warm April evening, they held a small community gathering, locals, rescue workers, volunteers, even a few reporters. Daniel stood by the old fire ring with Sadie and Mia, addressing the crowd with a nervous kind of pride. This place used to be just a ranger outpost, he said. Now it's something more. We call it Echo Ridge. Sadie added, because sometimes the forest speaks. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we listen. There was laughter, a few cheers, and then quiet. Mia stepped forward. I didn't come here to be saved. I came here to disappear. But instead, I was seen. The crowd hushed. And I think that's what saves us. Not being rescued, being seen, being known. A stillness followed her words. Then, softly, applause. As the sun dipped below the tree line and stars emerged one by one. Daniel crouched beside Hunter near the edge of the clearing. Good job, partner. Hunter blinked slowly and leaned his head against Daniel's leg. From behind them, the laughter of children echoed. The crackle of fire. The sound of something whole. Daniel looked out at the darkening sky. You stayed with me, even when I didn't want to be found. You reminded me of who I used to be. He ran his hand down Hunter's back, pausing at the scar that had once been raw, now barely visible. I don't know what I would have done without you. Hunter didn't move. He didn't need to. Some bonds don't need voice to be heard. They're etched in snow, in silence, and in the steady heartbeat of those who choose to stay. And so the forest held its secrets. The stars watched, and the shepherd, both dog and man, stood quietly at the edge of the wild, ready for whatever came next. The seasons turned once more. Spring gave way to summer, and the high mountain trails bloomed with wildflowers and light. The snow had long melted, but its memory lingered in cool shadows and quiet hearts. Pine Ridge was no longer just a name on a map. It was a place where stories had rooted deep in the earth, where silence had once spoken louder than words. Hunter, now a legend to some, simply remained himself. He walked the trails each morning, not out of duty, but instinct. Beside Daniel, he greeted hikers and watched over the youth who had once been like Mia, lost, angry, invisible, and slowly, those who came to the ridge found something they didn't know they needed: a place to be still, to be seen, and to begin again. Daniel, once buried in grief, now lived differently. He spoke more, laughed more. His hands, once only steady in survival, now built cabins, fixed trail signs, and held others when they cried. Sadie taught wilderness classes and led moonlit walks, telling stories about courage and the power of listening. Mia returned often, working with the younger teens and helping run the shelter's animal care program. And Eli? He spoke in full sentences now, drawing comics of heroic dogs and bear cubs under pine trees. The video of Hunter and the bear cub was still shared around the world. It played in classrooms and rescue workshops. But here, in the ridge, it wasn't a viral moment. It was a memory, a quiet miracle that kept echoing forward. One summer evening, as the fireflies began their dance and the fire pit glowed soft orange, Daniel sat beside Hunter near the edge of the bluff. He looked out over the valley and whispered, "You saved more than a cub. You saved me." Hunter didn't move. He just stayed close, eyes steady on the horizon, as always. Because some heroes don't need medals. They need only one thing: a place to stand, and someone to stand with. And so, beneath the stars, a dog and a man sat in silence. Not because they had nothing left to say, but because, sometimes, the quiet says everything. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. If Ranger's journey moved your heart, or reminded you of the quiet strength that lives in all of us, please consider subscribing to Kindred Spirits. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your feelings, your memories, or simply say hello in the comments below. Every voice matters. Every listener is part of this story. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and never stop believing in second chances. Evergreen Tree Paw.